All right, well, welcome everyone. As I mentioned earlier, we're speaking on the mid-year update on preparing for PBM audits, at least as it relates to the year 2024. You have myself, Harini Papathi, and my colleague, Day Lee. We're both partners here at Fryer Levitt. And as we get started, just some housekeeping. Anything in this presentation, we don't want you to take as legal advice. Of course, Day and I are not your attorneys officially, just by presenting on these types of issues, and we encourage everybody to get their own independent legal advice or advice on any of the issues that we speak about, on anything that we talk about here. So essentially, do not construe anything that we speak about today as legal advice.
All right, thanks, Irini. Hi, everyone. Let me tell you briefly about our firm, Fryer Levitt. We are a national boutique law firm dedicated to servicing various stakeholders in healthcare and life sciences industries. Right now, I believe we have more than 50 attorneys in the bench, and each of our attorneys are, we consider ourselves as the subject matter experts in healthcare and life science industries. We represent literally thousands of pharmacies, provide wide range of services, including, without limitation, challenging PBM audit findings, pharmacy acquisition and sale, board of pharmacy complaints and disciplinary action, as well as licensing issues for pharmacies. Next slide, please. Again, my name is Day Lee. I'm a partner and a pharmacist attorney at Fryer Levitt. I focus on, representing pharmacies, plan sponsor, manufacturers in their dealings against PBMs. For pharmacies, my service includes challenging audit findings, challenging unwarranted termination or suspension, as well as board of pharmacy related regulations. And again, we have 50 plus attorneys who are subject matter experts, and we collaborate internally if there's any issues that come up involving pharmacies. Rini?
Yep, and my name is Harini Papathi, also a partner here at Fryer Levitt. I work alongside Day. We have a pretty robust team when it comes to challenging any sort of adverse PBM actions, and we represent a wide range of different types of providers, such as retail, specialty mail order, compounding, and physician dispensing providers. Again, not just on PBM issues, but of course, there's a cross intersection when it comes to regulatory issues, transactional issues, as well as any sort of investigations as well here at the firm. So to begin with, we have a couple things laid out here. We've done a number of presentations in the past, as many of you guys know, on preparing for PBM audits, any audit trends that we've observed over the past few years. We have an audit checklist that's available for download for anybody that's interested, and I imagine that's what led most of you here today as well. We typically try to update it every year at the beginning of it and at the end of it, just based on the trends that we observe that are happening when it comes to PBM audits. And so one of the things that we'll be doing during the course of today's presentation is just going through some updates that we've identified based on the trends in 2024 and at the end of 2023 that we think are really going to impact audits and pharmacies' participation in PBM networks going into the rest of the year. The other thing is, the most important thing I'd say out of all of this is to really understand what measures pharmacies can take to be able to prevent audit discrepancies or any sort of adverse actions when it comes to their network participation in PBM networks. That's one of the reasons that we put this checklist out, is because we always love for pharmacies to be proactive rather than reactive in many ways. And to that end, because of the changes and the trends that we observe with PBMs, we've identified throughout the presentation different types of documents, as well as any other tools that pharmacies can utilize when they're challenging audit findings and any sort of recoveries. Again, depending on the type of discrepancies, we'll go ahead and identify some key documents that pharmacies can utilize. And really quickly, we completely forgot to mention, there is a Q&A feature included in this presentation, and all of the questions are confidential. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask us, feel free to just shoot them over in the Q&A. Only Day and I can see it, so we will answer them, as we have time at the end. Moving on, it's really important as pharmacies prepare for audits to understand the different types of audits that they can encounter. That includes on-site virtual audits, virtual because of COVID. But I mean, also there's a certain level of efficiency that I think PBMs have identified through doing virtual audits. And even though we live in a post-COVID world of sorts, the virtual audits still continue. There's also desktop audits and investigations. Investigations, I say, are very distinct from audits in some senses, but we'll go through that. So to begin with, we have on-site and virtual audits. Typically during an on-site audit, pharmacies get noticed of it through their auditor. It could be noticed, meaning a pharmacy could have an announced audit or an unannounced audit. Oftentimes we'll see unannounced audits happen when pharmacies are getting credentialed before they're in the network. Of course, they could have an unannounced audit at any point of their participation, but typically once they're in the network, we usually see them becoming announced. And so typically pharmacies will receive a list of prescriptions that are masked, that the auditor that will come onto site should, that the pharmacy should expect that the auditor will go ahead and review. And to that end, pharmacies should check to make sure that any of the prescriptions and documents on their possessions are maintained appropriately so that when the auditor does come on site, that they're readily available to be reviewed. To that end, and we'll talk about this in detail later as well, pharmacies should really make sure that their pharmacies are clean in the sense that that includes a refrigerator, that includes a sink, that includes, something as well as the separation of your inventory, and to make sure that you don't have any expired, recalled, damaged drugs on your shelves. That's a really big, important thing that a lot of auditors will look for, and that you also have proper signage, and that your staff is also aware of what your policies are as a pharmacy, especially because it depends on who's on site at the audit. On the pharmacy side, to be able to answer the questions to the auditor, they should be very well aware of the pharmacy's operations, especially during an on-site audit. Another type of audit is a desktop audit. That could include both prescriptions that the pharmacy is requested to provide information for, such as signature log, copy of the prescription, copay information, etc. As well as I construe an invoice reconciliation to be part of a desktop audit as well. Invoice reconciliation essentially means that the pharmacy can be expected to provide all the purchase records as well as dispensing information. Sometimes, again, because the PBM might ask for dispensing information across all payers during the time of a desktop audit. That is usually done through email communications, phone communications, etc. And then finally, you have an investigation. Investigations may look like audits, but they use different terms, the word investigation. And some of the reasons for that is because it is a little bit more aggressive in nature. You usually don't get as much of a turnaround time to be able to provide responsive information. For example, where some audits give you 30 days to be able to provide a response, you might only get 14 days in the course of an investigation. The other thing is that oftentimes in investigations, we see patients and prescribers also being contacted to let them being contacted that a potential investigation of the pharmacy is going on. So these are the different types of audits. And the reason that we start off by identifying these is because you can see that there's a significant amount of documentation that's being requested, whether it's on-site, desktop, or an investigation, that will then impact how you prepare for an audit as well.
One thing that I wanted to mention about on-site audit is certain PBMs, including Optum, they're really particular about temperature logs. So they will, check the temperature logs and whether temperature logs are recorded real time or shortly after, so on a regular basis. So please be mindful of that. Okay, so notice of audit or investigation, like fraud, waste, and abuse investigation. So it is important that pharmacies fully respond to the PBM's notice of audit or investigations. Typical life cycle of audits include notice of audit, initial findings, and final findings. Pharmacies have opportunities to submit appeal responses along with supporting documents to each phase of the audit findings. In an audit, PBMs will look at the claim submitted by the pharmacy during a certain period and try to identify alleged discrepancies, and they identify discrepancies into different types of discrepancies, whether it be copay, drug invoice shortage, invalid prescription, prescriber denial, patient denial, or other discrepancies. So the first step in PBM audit is responding to the notice of audit or notice of investigation, wherein PBMs typically ask for hard copies of the prescription, signature log, delivery slips, proof of collection of co-payments. They will also ask for a list of wholesalers so that PBMs can obtain purchase records directly from the wholesalers to conduct reconciliation audit, in addition to the prescription audit. And pharmacies, it is very important for the pharmacies to compile the requested documents and submit them in the well-organized manner to avoid to reduce the number of discrepancies identified in the initial audit findings. Next slide.
And just really one more thing I want to mention, Day, to what you had indicated, is that sometimes we'll see some PBMs ask for additional information, not just related to your prescriptions or your wholesaler information, but also related to your practices generally. It's becoming much more common that pharmacies are being asked to provide copies of their policies and procedures, such as co-payment or financial hardship, as well as just information about any relationships they might have with hubs or with marketers, third-party marketers. So that's becoming much more common in the course of audits.
Thanks for bringing that up, Irini. In terms of policies, a lot of pharmacies purchase, cookie cutter policy and procedures from third-party vendors. That's fine. However, you have to make sure that the policy procedures are tailored to your practice, because PBMs will monitor it. They'll request it, as Irini mentioned. They'll review it. They'll ask questions about it. So you cannot, it's fine that you purchase the templates, but you have to tailor it to fit your operation.
And you actually have to adhere to them, because not only are you submitting these policies and procedures just to show you have them, you're suggesting that you're actually adhering to them. You're putting yourself to that additional standard that perhaps even the PBM might not be putting you to. So it's important that when you do develop these policies and procedures, they're practical and they're actually something that you're following and that your staff is also being trained on. And so that kind of brings us to the sort of compliance aspect, both related to the State Board of Pharmacy as well as PBMs. And the reason that we still address the State Board of Pharmacy here, even though we are speaking about PBM audits, is because there is sort of an interplay into, the compliance as on the PBM, as on a Board of Pharmacy perspective, and then also on a PBM perspective. So, for example, one of the biggest things is to make sure that your pharmacy is licensed in every state that you're dispensing medication in, not just in the home state. So if you are in one state, but you're servicing patients in the state over, are you appropriately licensed? That is something that PBMs will also take a look at, especially in the course of an audit. Of course, there's instances of where you might be servicing the patient in your state, but the patient might be residing in another state. Oftentimes we see that happening, for example, with Florida and snowbirds. So again, something to keep in mind as well is to make sure that you're compliant from a State Board of Pharmacy perspective. The other thing is to make sure that your information is also updated with the State Board of Pharmacy, especially when it comes to the hours of operation, your PIC, and to that end, even your NCPDP, it should be updated as well, because a lot of the times pharmacies will be reviewed, or their information will be reviewed by PBMs against the Board of Pharmacy, as well as the NCPDP website. To that extent, if you have any employees, whether you're PIC, your staff, or anybody else that might have any sort of past licensure issues or current licensure issues, that might then warrant some sort of proactive reporting obligation to the PBM as well. And that, again, comes up in the course of audits, because not only is your pharmacy being reviewed, your pharmacy's prescriptions and wholesaler information and everything else being reviewed, but your pharmacy is being reviewed. And that also includes your employees and anything else of, related to your ownership or all your employees. And to that extent, when it comes to PBM compliance, it's really important to make sure that pharmacies are adhering to those terms and conditions. The reason that we have so many updates from, like our 22 checklist to 23 to 24 is because PBM terms and conditions constantly change. There's additional requirements that are being placed on pharmacies all the time that it's important for pharmacies to keep in mind or to review communications that they get from PBMs. That includes looking at your provider manual, looking at your agreements, looking at your portal accounts with those PBMs, because some things are only communicated to you through those portal accounts. So it is a lot of communication to be on top of, but again, if it means you'd be able to avoid an audit on an issue that a PBM might have noticed you about earlier that year, it's worth it. And to that extent, we already addressed the policies and procedures aspect of it. But again, those are important things to all keep in mind.
Another thing is that PBMs tend to, when they try to terminate a pharmacy, they tend to terminate commonly affiliated or pharmacies under common ownership or have a relationship with multiple owner situation or passive investor situation. But sometimes PBMs try to terminate a pharmacy because a pharmacist or PIC working at the pharmacy was previously worked at another pharmacy that faced significant audit findings or terminated from that PBM's network. So you have to vet your ownership structure as well as your partnership structure, but also your employees and their employment background.
Yeah, that's a great point, Doug. We touched on this earlier, but just because it's so important during the course of an on-site or a virtual audit, the key issues to keep in mind is the presentation of the pharmacy, the access of the pharmacy, the operations, as well as signage and displays. I'd say signage and displays comes into major scrutiny when the pharmacy is first getting credentialed during an on-site audit. Of course, it's still important at a later point as well, but again, I'd say when you're first getting credentialed, it's important. When we speak about presentation of the pharmacy, it means a lot of things. It means, is your pharmacy clean? Are you separating your inventory? Are you keeping front end neat, but also are you keeping your inventory properly organized as well? To that extent, are your operations reflective of what you indicated to the PBM? For example, we've seen PBMs take issue with a pharmacy mailing when they came on site to an on-site audit, because they came in, they noticed a bunch of UPS boxes, just laying around, getting ready to be shipped out, which is completely fine if the pharmacies, again, mailing their prescriptions to their patients. But the problem here was that the pharmacy never indicated in the course of their credentialing documents that they were ever mailing to patients. So that became a really big red flag for the auditor that suggested that, hey, pharmacy, how are you operating inconsistent with what you've told us? So that's really important to keep in mind, is that your pharmacy is operating in a way that you've disclosed to PBMs as well. Another thing is the access to the pharmacy itself. This is, again, not only a Board of Pharmacy issue, but a PBM issue, in the sense that you need to make sure that only the appropriate personnel has access to your pharmacy's inventory and operations. To the extent that you have contractors or spouses even having unrestricted access to the pharmacy could be a concern from a PBM perspective as well. And we say hours of operation being important because are your hours of operation updated to the PBM? For example, are you closed on President's Day, and have you disclosed that to the PBM? And I say that because we've seen instances where a pharmacy has failed an audit just because they were closed on President's Day, and the auditor wasn't able to complete their audit because the pharmacy was closed. And so those are things, sounds really minor in detail, but things to keep in mind as you
It
go
also
through
applies to,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Harry. That also applies to like credentialing process, right? Because
definitely.
PBMs, they will, as part of their credentialing process, will do an unannounced visit. And if the pharmacy is closed, then they automatically deny the pharmacist's application. And sometimes you have to wait a prolonged period in order to reapply. And that denial is already in your record, so it's going to be used against you.
Yeah. And to that extent, the personnel that you have on site as well is important, especially if you've hired consultants or anybody else that's not been a disclosed employee at any point to the PBM. That could really be of concern. Some PBMs have limitations on the use of consultants that haven't been disclosed to the PBM as well. So again, everything that you've indicated to the PBM in the course of credentialing should be reflective of what's happening at the pharmacy. Again, signage and displays, as we talked about, is making sure that's reflective more from a board of pharmacy perspective than anything else, but still important to keep in mind. And we throw it in there because we want folks to use our checklist and any other key points that we identify as more of a holistic consideration from PBM and normal operation perspective.
Inventory audits or invoice reconciliation audits have been and will continue to be an area where we see a lot of egregious practices by PBMs. So in essence, PBMs will compare the amount of drugs purchased by the pharmacies and then compare those against the claim billed by the pharmacy. If the pharmacy has surplus of the purchases, then there should not be any shortages. However, there are several factors that lead to inventory shortages and have been used by PBMs as a ground to identify or tag discrepancies on those claims. So the first one is PBMs only look at the purchases made during during a given audit period or a month prior to the beginning date of the audit. So this leads to a problem for pharmacies that made, bulk purchases when products were on sale or wholesalers provided greater discount if the pharmacy purchased in bulk. Uh, it's a common practice because, in this day and age where, the reimbursement rates are ever decreasing, pharmacies have to maximize the profit, right? In order to maximize the profit, you have to decrease acquisition cost so that you increase your profit margin. Second is the PBMs, they refuse to account for drug products purchased from another pharmacy. Even if they do, they require a host of documents that are not readily available, such as wholesaler license of the pharmacy, license of the selling pharmacy, proof of payment, and pedigrees. And I'll talk about pedigrees later. But these are documents that are not readily available, very hard to get, especially when you purchase from a pharmacy that's closing down or purchase through like online marketplace. Next one is if the pharmacy billed one NDC and dispense another NDC product of the same drug, PBMs will not give credits on purchases on the dispense NDC, leading to shortages. It's not a big concern if the billed NDC is generic and dispensed NDC is the same drug product but another generic. There shouldn't be too much of a price difference, but it becomes a bigger issue if the pharmacy billed brand and dispensed generic. And because there will be there will be a huge difference in the reimbursement paid out by the PBMs, and PBMs, when they recoup the entire amount. They try to recoup the entire amount that they paid out on that given claim. Also, if these claims involve government claims, let's say Medicare, Medicaid, or TRICARE claims, then it is possible that PBMs report the pharmacy's conduct and share their audit findings with governing bodies, and which in turn may open up a formal investigation for potential violation of False Claims Act. And government may deem these claims as fraudulent claims, which opens up additional liability or the risk to the pharmacy. Next slide.
Yep, and really quickly, Dave, when you mentioned the difference between generic and brand drugs, and one of the things that we've seen is a PBM actually suggests that by dispensing the dispensing the brand, but then billing the generic, that there could have also been a labeling concern as well, and that could just be much more of a regulatory issue as well. So those are things to keep in mind.
Okay, the other one is PBMs, and this happened more recently. They began attacking pharmacies regarding the source of product, right? So PBMs required to purchase products from certain PBMs, NABP approved distributors, or manufacturers or manufacturer authorized distributors for diabetic test strips, and also products purchased through online marketplace, such as RxSeed, TrexAid, MatchRx, EasyRx. There are a bunch of other marketplaces where pharmacies sell their overstock inventory through the platforms. Also, certain diabetic test strip manufacturers have been demanding payment in more like a blackmail scheme from pharmacies that purchase the manufacturer's diabetic test strips from unauthorized wholesalers. And if the pharmacy cannot provide proof of purchases from authorized wholesalers or pay back the money demanded by the manufacturer, the manufacturer, in essence, threatens the pharmacy that they will report the pharmacy to PBMs. And, we actually have number of cases that are facing PBM audits, prompting from the manufacturer reporting to those PBM. So it is important for that pharmacies, while I understand that all independent pharmacies are busy servicing patients and they don't have extra resource, but they have to conduct inventory audits on a regular basis. Also, they have to, train and retrain your staff to make sure that you are the NDC that you're billing matches with the NDC that are being dispensed. And also, you have to train your staff about the proper inventory management to avoid or mitigate the risk of PBM scrutiny and potential negative audit findings. Okay, so going back to the onerous document requested by PBMs, as I indicated before, certain PBMs require pedigrees that include transaction history, transaction information, and transition statement. These are, if you purchase from reputable, wholesalers, you should be able to get these easily. But if you're using secondary wholesaler and, secondary wholesaler may go bankrupt, or they close down, you're not going to be able to get the T3 documents or pedigrees. And again, if you're using the online platform, it will be tough to obtain pedigrees. Uh, um, and lastly, I want to highlight that pharmacies must return products to the inventory when claims are reversed. And of course, there's a 14-day reversal window. And if you don't reverse, that becomes a independent basis of discrepancy. But if you don't return the products, then it will lead to shortages.
Yep.
Next
And when
slide.
it comes to the acceptance of inventory from other pharmacies, I will say it really depends on the PBMs as well as to what information and documentation they've been requiring. It hasn't been with any consistency that one PBM might require X documentation while another PBM might require X, or another PBM might not even accept them to begin with. So there are a lot of different considerations there to keep in mind and to make sure that you're informed of whether your PBM that you're dispensing or for the patient that you're dispensing medication to will accept your purchases from another pharmacy as well. And then later on this year, with the new rules as it relates to maintaining T3 documentation under the Drug Supply Chain Security Act going into effect, a lot of pharmacies have been wondering if that means that invoice reconciliation audits will be going away. No, that doesn't mean that. Just that, if anything, they probably will be increased to make sure that pharmacies are adhering to those pedigree documentation requirements or T3 requirements. To that end, record keeping is really important, especially in the course of a prescription or invoice audit. It's not uncommon, as they mentioned, for a pharmacy that you might have purchased from to go out of business, or even a wholesaler that you might have purchased from to go MIA or out of business. And to that extent, even though there might be instances where the PBM wants to confirm the purchases being directly from the wholesaler, in those instances of impossibility, the pharmacy's record keeping becomes really important. So again, does the pharmacy have proper record keeping practices in place? And whether or not all of the pharmacy staff is appropriately trained on those policies as well to make sure that they're maintaining not only those records, but also notes in the patient's profile as it relates to any sort of prescriptions or any sort of interactions with patients or with prescribers as well.
All right, so copay is, as you guys know, copay has been the focus of the PBMs during an audit. They historically request proof of copay, whether it be the check or cancel checks or credit card receipts. But sometimes nowadays they request merchant reports. If copay is not collected, they are going to attach CPY discrepancy and try to collect the entire reimbursement paid out on that claim, not
Yeah.
the copay amount. Okay, so it is critical that the pharmacies have sufficient record, receipt, credit card receipt, even uh, deposit slips, possibly for any cash payments, or even have merchant records. And I know some pharmacies use uh, third party vendors. They may collect copays on behalf of the pharmacy, which can be deemed as a violation or breach of the PBM agreement and manual. And sometimes pharmacies use different technology, such as a third party vendor sending out links or text messages via text messages to patient, and the patient pay through that vendor, and at the end it will be passed. The co-payment will be relayed to the pharmacy, but PBMs will require additional set of documents showing that the third-party vendor actually relayed the payment into the pharmacy's bank account, and you have to tick and tie each claim with the payment received through the vendor. And on top of that, PBMs will request patient attestation. And again, these are, you guys are busy treating patient, and some patient might not even be regular patient of the pharmacy. Some patient might be, so-called one and done, or some patients are deceased, or some patient cannot be reached, or some patients are not, mentally stable. But it is quite onerous for the pharmacy to collect all these documents, but you have to try. Otherwise, you're not only facing the financial impact, but also additional sanctions such as network termination or payment suspension or adjudication suspension. And don't be surprised that PBMs they will try to call the patient, contact the patient, and as you could imagine, that conversation is not going to be friendly. They're going to put pressure on the patients. They're going to intimidate. Their question is going to be intimidating, and to extract wrong answer, wrong response from the patient, which in turn will be copay discrepancy. And also, these are claims that, patients might have gotten like a year, 2 or 3 years ago. It's very hard for patients to remember specifics about a single claim. So it will be, you will face copay discrepancy, but there's ways to handle those. Just to recap what I discussed thus far. For example, the drug invoice shortage and copay collection, proof of copay. These discrepancies can be disputed, and we've successfully challenged PBM audits. Our firm has been in existence over 2 decades. I think we're reaching 25th year. As I mentioned before, we're literally, representing thousands of pharmacy. Harini and I have clients from West Coast to East Coast, from North to South, Hawaii to New York, and from, New York to Florida and Texas. So there, the messaging is, we wanted to make sure you're educated on these hot topics, but also the playing field is leveled in a way that we could help the pharmacies. There's, there are also laws to protect the pharmacy's rights.
Yeah, and jumping off of that day, I realized I kind of went by the record keeping slide a little bit quickly, but that kind of goes hand in hand when it comes to record keeping and copay collection, or any of the issues that we talk about today, how important record keeping is, especially during the course of an audit, because as they mentioned, it's very common for PBMs to contact patients or prescribers to verify the prescriptions, to verify their receipt, and importantly, the request of those prescriptions as well. And so that's why it's important to make sure that you are also doing your due diligence and confirming a patient-prescriber relationship. Speaking to the patient or confirming that the patient wants the medication before you're going ahead and dispensing it. And then also keeping, again, records of the fact that if there was a copay, that you collected it. And if not, what was did the pharmacy adhere to its policies as it relates to copay collection? And that in hand again goes with financial hardship as well. A lot of the times, a lot of folks say a patient couldn't afford their copay, and so we didn't collect it from them. But did the pharmacy have a proper financial hardship policy in place? Was there a financial hardship determination being done? Again, this is separate from the fact that, a lot of the times patients might be getting assistance through patient assistance programs or might be using coupons, which are, again, separate from the pharmacy's own independent financial hardship determination, which again requires significant documentation and analysis to be done versus just accepting at face blank that a patient might not be able to afford their copays. So there are a lot of practices and procedures that a pharmacy should be adhering to, and that too, the best form is in written form, is so that all of your staff, as well as management, everyone across the board is aware of what the pharmacy's financial hardship and copay collection practices.
Agreed. There's got to be a robust policy and procedures on the copay collection. I forgot to mention that any voluntary waiver on Medicare, Medicaid, or TRICARE can be interpreted or construed as a kickback violation and may potentially open up government investigation on the pharmacy, which in turn will be another layer of liability for the pharmacy.
Yeah. Moving on to prior authorization, this has been something that we've observed over the past few years becoming a significant concern for a lot of PBMs and even individual plans. It's really important that the pharmacy adheres to the PBM's terms and conditions when it involves prior authorizations. Many PBMs limit the level of involvement that a pharmacy might have in prior authorization, starting with whether or not they can even initiate the PA to whether or not they can submit the PA. And so it's really important to make sure that pharmacies are aware of the limitations that they have, and also importantly, following the point of sale messaging in the event that a prior authorization is required. A lot of the times that direction as to what they should be doing is often given through that prior authorization or the POS messaging that happens at the time of claim submission. And to that extent, when it comes to PAs, one of the biggest things that PBMs and plans look at is the accuracy of the PA that's being submitted itself. Is the clinical information related to the patient's claim accurate? Do they actually try and fail those? Is there a repeated pattern of the same information being submitted over and over again when it's not specific to that patient, just to be able to receive an approval? Those are all really important things to keep in mind. How is the PA being submitted? That is one of the most important questions that a pharmacy should be asking. Is it through its own portal account and Cover My Meds, for example? Is it going through the provider's account and then submitting them? Again, because there are limitations, both from a regulatory perspective, but also from a PBM perspective, as to the level of involvement that a pharmacy can have on the PA process, it becomes really important to be aware of those and to have a proper policy in place of, okay, PBM allows us to participate in the PA process. This is what we are allowed to do for example, specific payers. And this is what we can't do if the PBM doesn't allow us to participate in the PA process. Having that level of understanding is really important if the pharmacy has any involvement at all when it comes to prior authorizations.
And it's really important that pharmacies, if pharmacies are involved in the PA process, pharmacies should not make any misrepresentation in the
Yeah.
PA form itself. Don't call the plan or the patient, indicating that you are from the prescriber's office. That because these PA calls to the plans or PBM, they're being recorded. And we've had matters where PBMs provided or represented that the pharmacy made misrepresentation during a phone call to the plan or PBM, and the phone call has been recorded.
Yeah.
Okay, signature logs and delivery information. Signature logs and proof of delivery is another area for PBM's abusive practice. Since the public health emergency has been lifted, PBMs have gone back to the implementing no shipping or mailing requirement. If the pharmacy also delivers outside of its vicinity of the pharmacy, PBMs may likely assert that the pharmacy is not a retail pharmacy and should be credentialed as mail order pharmacy. And as you guys know, requirements for being mail order is very onerous. Even if you meet the requirements, it doesn't mean that PBM is going to open their arms and welcome you into their network. It's because every single major PBM, top three, owns mail order pharmacies. They also own specialty pharmacies, and their revenue from those pharmacies are quite high. They don't want to share their revenue with independent pharmacies. Um, PBMs also they will require pharmacies to provide patient attestation on top of signature logs or proof of delivery, confirming that the patient requested prescriptions to be filled at the pharmacy and receive such medication. Um, I, as I indicated before, PBMs will contact the patient, and that conversation is not going to be friendly. They're going to try to extract wrong answer from the patient, and then try to impose discrepancy and penalties upon the pharmacy. And also, in the event that the patients do not respond or does not pick up their phone, it will be automatically considered as patient denial. So the pharmacy will be tasked with collecting patient attestations and try to fight the discrepancy. And in the event that the pharmacies deliver medications to a caretaker or a nurse or the prescriber's office to be administered, and the signature log is signed by the patient's agent, then you will be forced to collect patient attestation from the patient, but it's going to be uphill battle because the patient may say, "Oh, I didn't receive it directly from the pharmacy, or I received from the prescriber," or they don't even recall getting the medication. And it's particularly challenging for mentally unstable patient, who gets like injection form of antipsychotics such as Invega, Sustenna.
When,
However,
so sorry,
go
Dave.
ahead.
No, I thought you finished your thought. Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say is that a lot of the times when folks are using or mailing prescriptions, they're not maintaining a copy of, they're usually just maintaining a copy of the tracking number. They're not maintaining the fact that the medication was actually delivered or, received by the patient, and relying on just that tracking number. Unfortunately, those tracking numbers expire. That's a very practical, unfortunate situation when it comes to these tracking numbers. And so it's important to confirm or to keep record, again, going back to record keeping, that the prescriptions were actually delivered to those patients. I say this especially true for those prescriptions or that were allowed to be mailed, by depending on the PBM. But it's important to keep individual delivery confirmations for each one of your prescriptions. And especially true if you're outsourcing the delivery of any medications as well. You'd want to keep your own independent records of this.
Thanks, Irene. Right. And I want to reiterate and re-emphasize that it is important to keep in mind that there are laws that guard the pharmacies from PBM's abusive practices and unwarranted audit findings. Um, Our firm has been defending pharmacies against PBM audits for over 2 decades and have developed key arguments for our clients. And we also developed the legal context within each of the PBM, major PBM, to streamline the process. We follow the dispute resolution procedure warranted under the provider manuals. After we exhaust the dispute resolution procedure, we time to time file legal action in the form of arbitration or private lawsuit against us PBMs. It's very important for pharmacies, regardless of the discrepant amount, to dispute the audit findings to the fullest extent, because they will try to combine older findings with the new findings, try to terminate the pharmacy from its network. And any unresolved audit findings, meaning that even if you paid money on it, pay back the money on it, it remains unresolved and it will be left in your file and they will try to use that against you.
That's a great point. I think it's important for pharmacies to challenge audit findings, and we say this often, regardless of the dollar amount. There's a reason often that an audit is triggered against a pharmacy to begin with, and so for those reasons, there might not be looking at just the issues related to the audit, but again, how that impacts the pharmacy's overall operations and how they're participating as a provider in the networks. So there's a lot of audit triggers, for example, how far you're servicing your patients, the type of medications you're dispensing. And while those issues might not directly lead to prescription specific or inventory specific discrepancies, it might become still a background issue for why a PBM might want to take action against minor audit discrepancies against the pharmacy. So that's really important to keep in mind, is that while we're never going to be told why the pharmacy is going to be audited, there is some consideration as you go through the audit process. It's not just the final dollar amount, but why this audit might have happened in the first place against the pharmacy. Again, the checklist is available through our website. A lot of the information that we've identified here is included in there, and like we said, is a great starting point for pharmacies looking to become compliant, but also identify key areas that PBMs are looking at. We went through a number of those categories now, but it is just helpful to keep in mind as you review your own practices or develop your own new policies and procedures, hopefully based on what Day and I spoke about. We do have quite a lot of questions here, so maybe we can go through some of them. Someone asked, on a notice of an on-site audit, if they don't ask for invoice information, can they still ask for it on the day of the audit? Yes, it's possible that what happens at audits happen in there's different phases to audits. So just because an auditor might just ask for prescription information at one point of the audit doesn't mean that an auditor can't ask for the inventory information at a later point. In fact, it's very common that there's different phases to an audit. It's very common for there to be a prescription portion of an audit as well as an invoice reconciliation portion of an audit, and that doesn't necessarily matter whether it's an on-site audit or a desktop audit. So they could still ask for it. And the other thing when it comes to audits, and we mentioned legal tools and obviously relevant laws, is that many states have fair audit laws. And so if you're noticed of an audit, it's important to know what your rights are in relation to those audits. Some states have limitations on how many prescriptions can be reviewed, the timing of an audit, when initial audit results can be issued, etc. So there are a lot of fair audit laws that many states have implemented and offer those protections for pharmacies. But unfortunately, I will say, it might be distinct from when a pharmacy is hit with an investigation, because those are construed to be very different than an audit for, sometimes we think, as a reason to circumvent a lot of those fair audit laws. Dave, if you want to pick some of these questions, looks like there's a couple, so.
Can you pick? I can't view the questions.
Sure, yep. So many. Okay, what if Is an Excel report from UPS with tracking number, name and address sufficient for proof of delivery? Or do PBMs typically require individual documents showing proof of delivery from the courier? So we kind of touched on this earlier.
Yeah, I mean, they will request patient attestation or individual signature log or the proof of delivery. And again, they will contact that patient in order to uh, throw patient denial upon the pharmacy for that claim.
Yeah. Another one of the questions we received is there any guidance for what financial hardship determinations and assessments look like for patients who say they're unable to afford their copays? Like we mentioned before, that's where the policy comes in place, and one that we always recommend that gets reviewed by some sort of regulatory expert to make sure it's consistent with the law, state and federal, but also some things that we do at the firm because of our PBM experience is to make sure it's compliant from a PBM perspective. Some PBMs will actually have outlined procedures or outlined terms rather as to what should be going into a financial hardship determination, as well as the types of communications that should be sent out to a patient if they do or don't qualify for financial hardship, the percentage of coverage that they might qualify for, or, again, or even the documentation required to show that a patient qualifies for it.
Right, and I believe our one of the copay policy and procedures that we drafted were actually I don't want to say approved, but it was acknowledged by the government attorneys during one of the investigation that our firm handled to be the gold standard.
All right, Dave, so there's so many questions. Like we're gonna go through and we'll stay on for a couple of these through the end of this presentation. But if anyone has any individual questions that we don't get to at the end of this is our contact information if you guys have any questions and want to reach out, and if we don't get to your questions, or if you want to go into detail about specific questions about your pharmacy as well. Obviously, we understand not wanting to throw that into a Q&A, even though we can only see it, but still. Another question is relationships with previous employees or owners. Have there been any issues with the address of that specific pharmacy? For example, pharmacy A was located at this address, but they sold or closed down, and a new pharmacy opened that pharmacy in the same location. Would they be subject to similar scrutiny?
Possibly, the previously terminated NCPDP is so-called tainted NCPDP, and sometimes the PBMs actually look at the location and then try to scrutinize the buyer or the new owner of the pharmacy located in that location. So it is possible.
And we've seen PBMs question whether or not some transactions have actually been arm's length transactions. And so that's really important to keep in mind as well, is that when you're going through any purchase or sale of a pharmacy, that you're doing it with appropriate deal counsel, and ideally one that actually knows pharmacy regulations and the nuances of pharmacy. For example, one of the things that we'll often see when a pharmacy gets sold or is purchased is, during that sale or that change happening, is an inventory being taken. And this again ties into when inventory reconciliations are done, is that when that change of ownership of that inventory or that purchase is happening during a sale, that inventory is not being properly accounted for to the level of detail that a PBM might otherwise require. So yes, it's great to have a third-party reconciliation company come in, but are you confirming the sourcing of your products through an additional layer? Invoices, pedigree documentation from the original, purchaser of those medications, all important when you actually go through the course of an audit. And then, of course, when you're going through a transaction. More of a couple of these housekeeping questions about whether or not we're going to share this deck. This presentation will be recorded, but I will say the substance of a lot of what we spoke about is readily available in terms of the checklist that we went through. So that is very important to, we would recommend that everyone just download it so that they have that readily available. Has anyone successfully sued the PBMs due to their abuse of rules and regulations, plus the fact that PBMs own their own pharmacies and probably not holding their own pharmacies to the same standards?
I am not aware of lawsuits on that exact
Specific issue.
topics.
And
Yeah,
also
but
someone willing to exhaust their own resources
right.
alone to be able to do that.
Yeah, the litigation that we're handling, the pending cases that we have is very case specific and claim specific. And I am aware that the FTC is investigating PBM misconduct as well as a DOJ, Department of Justice, who recently formed a task force.
Someone asked, have you seen PBMs recovering on off-label use of medications? Yes, it is very common, especially for Medicare claims for PBMs to recover off-label if it's for a use that's considered non-FDA approved or off-label in the sense that it's not included in the compendia, which is usually a regulation that's required under Medicare Part D that a medication or a use or the use be identified in the compendia. And so if it's not included in the compendia and it's considered off-label, we have seen PBMs try to recover on those medications. What if a patient refuses signature at pickup? That is an interesting question, and I'd question why a patient would refuse to sign for a prescription at pickup. As a pharmacist, as a pharmacy, I'd say you have the obligation to identify red flags. When it comes to prescriptions and the fact that a patient is refusing to sign for his or her prescription, I'd say is a pretty big red flag there. There's like over 30 plus questions, and I'm trying to.
I think we should
Yeah.
have them send it to us, and then we could try to answer them individually.
Yep. And if you guys, like I said, want to shoot us a quick email or just reach out, we're more than happy to set up a call to go through any of the specific questions you might have. There are so many questions, and we apologize for not being able to get through all of these. But maybe one of the things that we'll consider doing later on this year as we think of an end of year update to our presentation or to our checklist is focusing on some of the questions that you guys might have for us and dedicating more time. But like we said, we regularly update this checklist, and you can certainly expect one for later this year as the trends on PBM audits continue. So thanks everyone for joining. Like we said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But otherwise, we'll leave you with the message of being proactive rather than reactive.